but let's start with Japan. All right,
Yeah.
because there's a lot of discussion. As you can imagine, the relatively new Japanese Prime Minister Takaichi, she recently had some pretty provocative comments, or when she was asked by the Japanese Parliament, I think, about Taiwan.
Mhm.
And this is what she said. She said that such actions, particularly involving warships and military force, could constitute a survival threatening situation. You see, that's where it's got very, very immediately China reacted because the survival threatening situation is that the excuse they used last time when they invaded China. That's what
Oh,
they said.
really? Oh,
Yes.
I didn't know. I didn't know. That, by the way, has not been made clear in the media here.
No,
The media has covered the story extensively, but they've not explained that.
no.
Well, that is extremely significant and very, very important
Yeah.
indeed, if I may say. Now, I get the sense that this lady is completely out of her depth. She doesn't understand
No.
the nature of the forces that
Hmm.
she's playing with. And of course, as often happens when people do this and like to posture in this incredibly reckless way, she risks getting Japan involved in something that which would be very, very bad and dangerous for Japan itself. Now, I understand that popular opinion in Japan is to stay out of this whole situation. That despite the fact that the Japanese elite has been moving in a more militaristic, anti-China direction now for quite a long time,
Hmm.
that does not reflect wider opinion in Japan. But anyway, we'll see what comes. I think this could start a reaction within Japan too. And it might be possible that there might even be a political repercussions as well.
And before the World War II, the Japanese aggressions throughout the history, China likes to look at history, right? So
Yeah.
throughout the history, Japan tried a few more times, trying to get to China. You see, Japan is in the location of Japan is kind of like a not very friendly for a human to live because it has volcanoes and earthquakes and
Yeah.
tsunamis. And so it is a very harsh environment that they're living in. And that's why Chinese
Mm.
understanding of the Japanese intention is they always trying to get to the continent, to the land.
Yes.
Well,
Yeah.
who has the most land? Of course, China. So that's why throughout the Japanese history, they tried. The first time most recorded was during the Tang Dynasty. Of course, they
Yes.
failed, and then they
Yeah.
tried again
Yes.
in the Ming Dynasty. And both times they always occupy the Korean Peninsula first, using that as a
Yeah.
launch pad, and then get to China. So now, of course, last time, the previous two times, they were not even close, but this time was close, right? And the atrocities and all that. So
Yeah.
for China, actually, when Japan says this is survival threatening, for China, this is existential. When Japan claimed that, when Japan really
Abs-
seriously believed that, so
Absolutely true. It's also existential for Japan too to be involved in a
yeah,
conflict with China. Just
yeah,
bear something in mind. Japan engaged in sustained aggression against China starting in the 1890s. I think it was
mm-hmm,
1898 that the
yeah,
war was,
mm-hmm,
going all the way up to 1945.
yeah,
What was the result for Japan? An absolute catastrophe.
yeah,
And that was at a time when China was very weak.
mm-hmm,
I mean, the Qing dynasty was tottering. Cixi, who was, a person of some abilities, but she was clearly not in full control. And anyway, she probably didn't really understand how to contest a conflict with with Japan. And besides, the Qing probably didn't have the ability
mm-hmm,
to lead the Chinese people. China was poor. Its economy was in shambles. There was the time of the warlords. There were civil wars.
mm-hmm,
That is not China today. China today is the world's premier manufacturing and industrial power. It is the leader in AI technologies and any number of others. It dwarfs Japan economically. The idea that Japan could want to try again what failed so spectacularly and disastrously before against the much, much more powerful China that exists today is insane. It's madness. And if it were ever attempted, it probably would destroy Japan.
Mhm.
So, I mean, I think that is something that people in Japan perhaps do need to understand. Now, I've heard many times of Japan attacking China. I have never heard of a single instance when China attacked Japan. The
Mhm.
Mongols did,
Uh-huh.
but China never did.
No.
China has never attempted to attack Japan. China shows no interest in wanting to attack
Mhm.
Japan. If Japan has problems because of lack of resources and the fact that there's volcanoes and tsunamis and all of those things, well, there's a very simple solution. It gets on good terms with China and it moves forward. I mean, there was a time, I mean, my rice cooker upstairs was bought from a Japanese company, but it was actually made in China. So, I mean, there's all kinds of ways of developing Japan and doing so together with China.
Mhm.
Trying to do it against China is madness. And again, I come back to what I was saying. This lady is completely out of her depth. She doesn't understand what she's talking about. Reviving the rhetoric of that kind of rhetoric is reckless beyond anything I can even say. And I mean, it needs to stop. And I hope people, some more sensible people in Japan, would give her that advice.
Another thing the Western media got it wrong is
Mm,
the translation. One of the things that China did a lot of things to react to this, like discouraged
mm,
Chinese people from traveling to Japan, and it really
mm.
had a big impact because lots of people did cancel their travel
Yeah.
plan to Japan, and also stop buying seafood from Japan, which is a blow to the Japanese seafood industry. Uh, but there is a Chinese consul general in Osaka, and he said the Western translated that that filthy head that changed that charged forward on its own must be cut without hesitation. So this is the translation from his post on X on the social media. I wouldn't translate that way. Based on the Chinese, what he wrote there, you see, in China, there is a concept called a miaotou. Miaotou actually means signs. So it's actually saying when some small head pop up, there is a sign. Okay, what he is saying, this I think, is the Japanese militarism. There seems there is a sign there. So as soon as there is a sign pop up, we should cut
Yeah.
that. That would
Yes.
be my interpretation, my
Yes.
understanding of what he meant. But the West translate that he want to cut off the prime minister's head. That
Yes.
I wouldn't translate that way.
Well, that's nonsense. I mean, obviously he didn't mean to cut off them or suggest that. I mean, that is absurd. But of course, this goes on all the time. Again, as somebody who follows Russian things,
Mhm.
I can tell you for practically every speech that Putin makes is misrepresented, sometimes in grotesque ways. I'll give you an example. I mean, Putin was once asked about, policies of peace, and he says, "Absolutely, I'm in favor of peace. I'm as great an advocate of peace as Mahatma Gandhi was," and he was making a joke. And the West actually then said that Putin claims that he is the new Mahatma Gandhi. It's absolutely ridiculous. There was even an editorial in the Times to that effect. So nothing like that surprises me. And it is one of the great disadvantages that China and Russia both have,
Mhm.
which is that the dominance of English
Yeah.
means that these lies, because they are lies, I mean, these
Mhm.
are deliberate misrepresentations, when they are made, there is no effective counter to them. I mean, for every person like you who explains what this person really meant, you can be absolutely sure that there's all sorts of people on X who are just busy regurgitating the original false translation of this Chinese diplomat's words.
And I think another thing that varying for me is that in Japan the rice, for example, the inflation is really high, and in particular, like the
Yeah.
rice price has gone up really
Yes.
significantly.
Right.
So that now they are putting in coupons. So basically
Mm.
limit the people who can how much they can buy with a certain price. Okay. And then another report that I just saw is that there is a, an increase of Japanese sex workers going overseas, like Australia. They have seen uptick, a significant increase of Japanese sex workers, which is, I would think, unthinkable just a few years ago. Japanese sex workers, but all these, I think, are signs that the Japanese economy are encountering some serious problems. But that isn't that make Japan more dangerous?
Well, it doesn't exactly, and I have to say, I mean, those sort of things are unimaginable. The idea of Japanese sex workers, the very expression would have been inconceivable, and that they would be going abroad,
Mhm.
also inconceivable. And once upon a time, you remember, I worked with Japanese companies
Mhm.
back in the 80s. In those days, Japanese, even businessmen, didn't like going abroad. I mean, I'm talking about serious. It was they were very insular in some ways, but now sex workers. I mean, it boggles the mind. By the way, rice as well. I mean, the
Yeah.
idea of Japan, which always claims to have the best rice. They have all these different categories of rice that they have.
Mhm.
I'm not commenting on whether those claims are ever true. By the way, that's another thing. But I mean, the Japan would be running short of rice is incredible,
Mhm.
and again, it does reflect serious problems in the Japanese economy, and it doesn't surprise me because what has Japan been doing for the last 30 years? 40 years, it's
Mhm.
been trying to reflate its economy all the time. And I understand that this new prime minister is a disciple of Shinzo Abe. And he was trying all the time to create inflation because he thought that inflation would be the way to get the Japanese economy moving again. He had this theory that it was deflation that was the problem in Japan. And of course, what's happening is it's, of course, exactly as one would expect, running out of control. He was a clever and skillful man, whatever you may think. I think he's a much cleverer man than this prime minister we have now.
Yeah, and not only that, even Korea recently called off a joint military drill with Japan because Japanese aircraft recently flown around some disputed islands as well. So she just seems like a very aggressive
Oh,
overall.
she is. She is. Now, I went to Korea. It was a long time ago. It was about 20 plus years ago. But I have to say this, when I was there, the feelings about Japan in Korea were extremely strong. I was surprised at how strong they were. I got a sense that in Korea, which is, of course, occupied by Japan
Mhm.
for many decades, there is a feeling that Japan the feelings about Japan are even stronger than they are in China.
Yeah.
So, talking in this very aggressive way is going to alarm people in Korea too.
Yeah, I think Korean in general, I think their feeling towards China is more, I feel like it's more jealousy. But with Japan,
Yeah.
it's downright, they are very, very worried about Japan all the time, I think.
I think that's absolutely right. Now, when I was in Korea, which it was a long time ago now, but the overwhelming sense I got then
Mhm.
was that the sense in Korea was that China was the colossus next door,
Mhm.
whose influence was pervasive. I mean, Korean culture is built around Chinese culture. Korea is a very Confucian society
Uh-huh.
still, and so there's this very complex attitude towards China there, in the sense that it's obviously the model you want to copy, but it's also the giant next door.
Mhm.
So that there's a mixture of admiration, jealousy,
Mhm.
and maybe a certain amount of nervousness. Whereas with Japan, there is no sense of admiration at all. So
Yeah.
it's quite different. I mean, it's much more straightforwardly antagonistic.
The US reaction, Trump's reaction is kind of interesting. On the one hand, when Laurie Ingraham was interviewing him, she
Yeah.
brought this up, and she's the one who's saying, "Oh, they're threatening to cut off the prime minister's head and stuff like that." Trump's reaction actually is kind of interesting. He didn't just say, "Oh, I condemn that. That's dangerous," and that kind. he just said, well, our allies sometimes take advantage of us more than China. So he kind of like diffused, I think, a little bit.
Yes,
And also, the US also pulls the missile system out of Japan that,
yes.
so I feel like on this matter, I think Trump doesn't seem like want to get involved in this, right?
Well, he's just been absolutely smashed by Xi Jinping at that recent meeting. He's now knows that the absolute thing that he must avoid at all costs is getting involved in an economic war with China.
Mhm.
That China holds all the high cards. Um, and the very last thing he wants at the moment, I would have thought, if he's got two brain cells to rub together, is to get into another argument with China over what is essentially a Chinese Japanese
Mhm.
issue. So for once, I think he was acting sensibly, but you can understand why he would do it. I
Yeah.
mean, uh, it's only just, was it 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago,
Yeah.
that he was meeting Xi Jinping, and I don't think he'd want to go through all of that again.
The G7 I think a foreign minister had a meeting. Again, I don't know why are they so focused on China. They in their statement there were quite a few things they mentioned about China. So among other things, this part got my attention. It says we emphasize the importance of maintaining peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. You see, just right there, China will be angry because Taiwan is part of China. This is a Chinese
Yeah,
domestic issue. Why would the
yes.
G7 bother to say anything about that? And then they said, and opposed any unilateral attempts to change the status quo, particularly by force or by coercion. We encourage the peaceful resolution of cross-strait issues through constructive dialogue. We also express support for Taiwan's meaningful participation in appropriate international organization. You see, I find this is by itself is very contradictory. If you want to keep the status quo, you shouldn't encourage Taiwan to participate in any international organizations, nor can there be a resolution to resolve this cross-strait matter, because if that matter got resolved, then it is a change of status quo. Don't you think that's a contradictory
Well,
kind of?
you're absolutely right. The G7 should not be meddling at this affair at all. I mean, it's got absolutely nothing to do with them. What the United States and the other G7 states, and why are the G7 states even involved in? I mean, why is France, Germany, and Britain talking about Taiwan? I mean, they're far away. They're not able to do anything practically in this situation anyway. And as for the United States, if the United States wants to help people in Taiwan, it's very simple. It facilitates a dialogue between them and China, mainland China. I mean, that's what the United States should be doing. That's what it promised to do, as you pointed out to me in previous programs. I mean, that would be actually honoring the spirit of the agreements that were reached long ago, back in the 1970s. But no, of course, what they do is they it's the usual game they always play. They've played it many times over Ukraine. They make these statements which naive people, innocent people in the West, who probably are not familiar with all the facts, in fact, we're not familiar with all of the facts of the story, will read, and the impression that is conveyed there is of the big bad wolf, China, waiting to pounce on poor innocent Taiwan. And it's part of that manipulation of language and of speech that goes on all the time in the West, which creates this bad atmosphere, which the West then tries to use in order to use to its own advantage, to make China look bad and itself look good, and to pretend that China is being aggressive when the people who are really changing the status quo, exactly as you say, are the Western powers. As to why they do it, why there is so much attention by the G7 to China, I've discussed this many times. Always, invariably, on every international issue, Venezuela, whatever, always China is there at the back of their minds.
So here's the question, right? even though China today is way stronger, more powerful than it used to, during the time when the Western alliances, they burned down the Summer Palace and all that sort of thing. During that time, today's China is a very different one. But I'm not sure the Western colonizers see it that way, even though they see it, but I'm not sure it has processed this whole thing. And so that's why in China, there has been on the social media sphere, there's now discussions that like, even though Chinese people in general loves peace, they would prefer everything goes smoothly, peacefully, including unification with Taiwan, all that, and having a good relationship with its neighbors, including Japan. But considering the challenges that China is facing, like everywhere you turn, like you said, they are so obsessed with China and latest aggression, this kind of talks from the Japanese Prime Minister, and G7 is not only Taiwan, they also in their statement also talking about human rights, about Xinjiang and Tibet, the same old, same old. Okay. Yeah. It seems to like they will never stop. All right.
No.
And also, what just happened with Nexperia, even though now the Dutch government did give back the control, but still it says temporary, it's not fully, and they haven't restored the CEO and all that. And now the Germany is saying, oh, we're not going to use any B products from China and stuff like that, even though he is going to visit China with all the industry people, etc. So there has been some discussions like maybe eventually a war is unavoidable to send a message to all these people, including Japan, including NATO, all these people, that China is strong and powerful, and that China is serious about unification, independence, all that kind of thing. What do you think?
Well, I have to say, I hope it never comes to that. I mean, a war is a terrible thing. But going back to your original point, no, the West has not internalized this. They cannot quite bring themselves to accept that China is equal to themselves. Bear something in mind, which is that Westerners are profoundly ignorant of China's history and China's civilization, whereas the Chinese people are very well informed about it. I'll give an example. I mean, my wife, as I've told you, is an English literature person. She is the leading scholar, one of the leading scholars in England on D.H. Lawrence, who is an English writer. She discovered that there are far, far more people, far more experts about D.H. Lawrence in China than there are in the Anglophone West. I mean, this is a major English writer. So how many people in the West have heard of Du Fu? Just to say, I mean, you could probably count them in a few hundreds. You could probably bring them all together in a room. And that is the fundamental problem. In the West, we are absolutely used to thinking that our civilization is the only civilization, the only real civilization. Yes, China did do a few things. Some people might know that, they invented gunpowder or something of that kind. But nobody really has a real sense of its depth and texture and sophistication. And that unfortunately translates to people's image about China today. There is still this idea that it somehow isn't real, that all of this strength that China has is all smokescreen. It's a paper tiger and all of that, and that if we push them back, well, obviously they can't be up to the quality and standard and wonder that we are. And if they are successful in a few things, making chips and AI programs, it's probably because they're stealing our technology in some way. So yes, absolutely. And there is no more dangerous situation than that, when on the one hand you are aware that this country, the civilization that you despise, is becoming richer and stronger, and when at the same time you feel massively superior towards it, because that tempts you into doing stupid things, which could turn out reckless and disastrously wrong. I think there are just enough people in the militaries in the West, at least in the American military, who do understand how catastrophic a war with China would be. But I agree. I think within Congress, within the leadership of the political leadership of the United States, within the political leadership of Europe, the number of people who are like that is tiny.
Yeah, and that's why, if you look at the what happened between Russia and Europe, like
Yeah,
Russian repeatedly said,
yeah,
well, then Ukraine is the red line, right? But
yeah.
it doesn't seem like a register with them. They
No,
still pushing the limit, dangling this
yeah,
NATO membership, and then they
yes,
started those kind of coup and not following the Minsk agreement. They just keep on doing things to irritate Russia until Russia started this
yes.
war with Ukraine. Before that, it seems like whatever Russia says, it doesn't register. They don't seem to take it seriously.
I think the Chinese are experiencing the same thing. And
Yes.
bear in mind, Westerners know an awful lot about more about Russia than they do
Mhm.
about China. I mean, uh, many educated Westerners have read Tolstoy or Dostoevsky. Most Westerners have heard at some time the music of Tchaikovsky. And yet, in spite of that, they are profoundly ignorant and deeply, I mean, in a generally racist way,
Mhm.
feel superior to the Russians. So think how they must feel about China, a vastly bigger country, but one which they know even so much less about. I should say something here, maybe, and it's critical of my own culture, but I remember when I went to Shanghai in 2017, and I saw how the various young people, the young Westerners there who were behaving, who were there presumably as teachers or whatever it was, the expat community, and I was deeply ashamed of seeing how they behaved. And that was people who are actually in China.
Mhm.
A total disregard, a total disrespect for for the country and the civilization and the people.
Yeah, and that's why, unfortunately, sometimes you just have to,
Yeah.
you know, act on it, not just to
Yeah.
try to convince
Yes.
people because they
Yes.
don't take it, seriously.
Yes.
So,
China will act. I mean, China has already, of course, acted in the economic sphere. And
yes,
notice how shocked the Americans were.
yeah.
I'm told, I've been told, I mean, not just privately, but, Robert Barnes said in public, and Robert Barnes has contacts in the US government, that Scott Bessent told Trump, of course, we can do all of these things on, 50%, sanction everybody with 50% interest and all that. Of course, we can do all of these things. The Chinese will never dare use rare earths against us. Shock horror. They did, and you could see the astonishment and the amazement when it happened. The same thing happened, by the way, in Korea. Yeah, I mean, the Americans saying to themselves, no conceivable way will the Chinese army respond if we
Uh-huh.
advance on China's borders. Absolute shock when the Chinese army did intervene,
Yeah.
and absolute shock when it fought well, which is a real surprise. And you could see, they have this attitude. However, often they learn the lesson.
Mhm.
They never seem to quite learn the
Yeah.
lesson. But
Yeah.
eventually, China will respond, as it did in Korea in 1950, and as did this year over trade, and we saw how devastating its response can be.
Yeah. So it just so that for that reason, more and more
Mm.
people on the social media are talking about like
Yeah.
maybe a war is not avoidable. Simply, you have to make it clear,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
The West, they believe in strength. You have to show
Yeah.
them the real strength, in particular, like military strength. right? So I'm not
Yeah,
saying that the people are ready to have war, but although in terms of having a war with Japan, there's 90% of support of that. So people don't have problem with that. I hope we
yeah,
don't get there, but if they do, I think China is fully ready to have this war with Japan. If
yeah,
Japan is stupid enough to get involved into China's unification effort, for example.
yeah.
But nonetheless, I think people are more and more like feeling uh, the necessity of almost like some kind of military actions to just make a statement, right? This is what we are serious. We do not afraid of war. Like, you know, like you think we will never use rare earth. What makes you think we will never use rare earth,
Well, exactly.
right? So, so
Well, exactly. I mean, I made this point before many in earlier programs that in the West, power, we are obsessed with power.
yeah.
I mean, you remember what I said that Western political thought derives from the many conflicts that the European states had with each other and the military aristocracies that led them. It's as if we have never really left behind us our own period of the warring states.
Mhm.
I mean, it's as if, we lived with that mindset. And I think that's something the Chinese people do need to understand. We've never really left that behind. That time period is still very close.
Regarding Ukraine war,
Mm.
the U.S. now secretly drafted a new plan, I guess, together with Russia to end the Ukraine war, the so-called the 28 points peace plan. What is that about, and what is your view on it?
Right. Well, the Russians absolutely denied that they had anything to do with it.
Okay.
That's the first thing to say. I mean, the Americans have been going around telling everybody that the Russians were involved. The Russians say they've never even seen it, and nobody has passed it on to them, and they know absolutely nothing about this. Now, what is happening is that Ukraine's army is crumbling on the front lines. I know this has been said many times, but this time it's true. Yesterday, the Russians captured an important town called Kupiansk. There's about we've had Ukrainian troops in Pokrovsk who are encircled. Donbass is about to fall. Many people have said, if the Russians take Donbass, the way's open all the way to Kiev itself, and certainly to the Dnieper. So suddenly, the Americans, who were telling each other just a few weeks ago that the situation on the front lines was in stalemate, suddenly need to stop the war quickly before there's a military collapse. So they're coming up with all these plans. And this plan that they produced is an extraordinary menu. It's like a sort of restaurant menu. It's got little bits that tempt one side and like tempt the other. So no, Ukraine won't join NATO. No NATO troops in Ukraine. But notice that's really very sneaky because they
Mhm.
say no NATO troops. But what
Uh-huh.
about British troops or French troops who go into Ukraine
Uh-huh.
but say that they're not there as part of NATO? So you see what they're doing.
Mhm.
So they're trying to come up with some kind of proposal that they can get both the Ukrainians and the Russians to accept, which will stop the fighting before the collapse comes. Now, the Russians, of course, who are not fools and who've been through this with the Americans many, many times, have seen right through this. And what they will say is, look, this 28-point plan as it stands, obviously it's interesting and is interesting as a discussion document. You now accept that Ukraine can't join NATO, and that's a big thing.
Mhm.
You accept some other things like that the whole Donbass area must come under our control. But there is an awful lot more work to do. So let's sit down and talk about it, which is, of course, exactly what the Americans don't want because they don't want to talk about these things. They don't want to get into a real serious, long drawn out negotiation with the Russians. What they want to do is to stop the fighting now before, as I said, Ukraine collapses. So that's what this is.
Okay. So we will see then. Yeah, I agree with you. I think
Yeah,
they don't like long discussions and
no,
negotiations.
no, they don't do them. They don't do them with China. They don't do them with Russia. The Russians have repeatedly suggested that the Americans put together a proper negotiating team and meet with them on a regular basis to iron these out and to find out what the real points of disagreement are and what the real concerns that each side has is, and then to move forward with them. That would be a process of about a year. The Americans don't want to do that, just as they don't want to do that with China. I mean, we've had all this business about trade negotiations with China. What trade negotiations? China has repeatedly offered trade negotiations, but are you aware of proper, serious trade negotiations? Of course not. This isn't certainly not what this administration is able to do. I don't think any administration is able to do that anymore.
Yeah, the US government like to have some idea and then they will throw at you and you just have to accept it, right? So
Yes,
yeah.
exactly. It works with some people. I mean, it
Mhm.
works with some countries.
Yeah.
It might work up to a point in the Middle East, for example,
Mhm.
up to a point, not
Yeah.
fully, but with big, powerful, structured societies and countries like China and Russia, certainly not with China, definitely not with Russia. It just doesn't work like that. And the
Mhm.
Americans just don't seem to get this. I am in touch with some people in the US who say they have contacts with the administration. I've been trying to explain this to them time after time, and it never gets through.
Yeah, the hubris and the arrogance, it's just never ending. They, whatever they do, it
Yeah.
just always,
Yes.
yeah, they never
Yes.
change.
And the idea that they can sort of pull a fast one, say,
Yeah.
no NATO troops in Ukraine. They don't realize that the Russians are going to see right through that instantly.
Yeah. Okay, so I think the past week or two, just the endless scandals seems to me
Yeah.
like. So let's start with the BBC. The
Yeah.
BBC apologized to Trump over it has a program on
Yeah.
Panorama program that they edited parts of it, Trump's speech or something, right? And on January 6th. And now Trump said that even though BBC apologized to that, Trump said that he will still sue the BBC for $1 billion. I just want to let you know, on this one, the Chinese people 90% support Trump on this one.
Yeah. So
So,
they should. They're absolutely right to. Yeah.
so can you tell us a little bit the British reaction to this and the BBC's future in general?
Well, this is actually an interesting story because, of course, the British have built up the BBC and the image
Mm,
of the BBC as this absolutely impartial, completely objective, fact-based media organization, and it has never at any time been that. It's always reflected very much British and Western attitudes and British government policies. There was a time when it was closer to that approximation than it is today. But I will give an example that I remember from my childhood, which is BBC coverage of the war in Vietnam.
mhm,
And I remember how even then the BBC always referred to the South Vietnamese army, the American the army that the Americans were backing. They always called them the government troops,
okay.
whereas the North Vietnamese army were
Mhm.
the communists.
Okay.
So you can already see what they were doing. So, and that was at a time when the BBC did perhaps approximate more closely to
Mhm,
objectivity. As time has passed, as Britain has got weaker, as politics in Britain itself have become increasingly partisan, and as the quality of the media in the West has descended and collapsed, the BBC has just become no different from the rest of the media here in Britain. So, if you want to go to coverage about China, Xi Jinping, dictator, Xinjiang, genocide, Tibet, oppression, you'll find all of those things in the BBC. And of course, they are widely accepted here. The one big mistake they've made is that they went after the man who is the president of the United States. The president of the United States, Donald Trump, very unpopular figure in Britain for all kinds of reasons. The BBC strongly backed all the claims during his first term that he was an agent of the Russians and that there was some kind of collusion between him and the Russians. That didn't work. So then they backed the story that he'd involved himself in some kind of insurrection, trying to overthrow the government of the United States and all of that at the end of the election. And of course, they did what they do all the time now. They regularly do this all the time, which is they edit and they present the stories in a particular way. And this has become so common and so routine that even many people in Britain now can see this. So whereas when I was a child, the BBC in Britain was seen as an enormous, trustworthy institution, it is no longer regarded in that way anymore. And that is creating a crisis for the BBC. And the way the BBC is funded is that all British people who own a television set or are able to access television pay a tax, which goes directly to fund the BBC. And more people in Britain are saying, why should we go on paying this, given that it's no longer the impartial, trustworthy organization that we remember? I think the BBC is in crisis. I think in 10 years' time it will be gone.
Yeah, and that I think everybody would be happy to say the BBC is gone.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I told you that there is even a term in China, it's called a BBC filter, right? That they just, when they take pictures in China, it's always gray. People would put the same picture side by side, very colorful blue sky kind of a day, but the same picture with the BBC somehow look gray and depressing. So that's how they influence people, their viewers, to hate China.
Once upon a time, back in the 1970s, I remember how the BBC used to do documentaries about Chinese culture and civilization, and they were very good. And today, it's a very, very long time since I saw anything about China on the BBC that was remotely positive. I mean, it's never been fully trustworthy, but there has been a massive decline, and it is going to lead to a fall.
And isn't that interesting that, okay, BBC, I guess when they did something like this to China, I mean, to Russia, to all other countries, there is never any consequences for them. There is no punishment or anything. But that's got them to feel even more relaxed and even more doing outrageous things, to the degree that they think they could do this to a US president. So well, indeed, that's when they've gone too far, right? So
Exactly. You see, the other thing was that the BBC's very involved in domestic politics. So, I mean, it was very hostile to Jeremy Corbyn, for example.
Okay.
I mean, so it's very, very hostile to certain people on the right who are critical of the war in Ukraine and the way in which British policy has been conducted there. And the BBC, like every other element of the British establishment, supported Biden and the Democrats against Trump and internalized a lot of the criticism of Trump. And so they, as you absolutely rightly said, they became complacent and they slipped into the habit of doing the same thing to Trump as they do to everybody else. So now they've been caught. It's been a very bad blow for them. As I said, I mean, they will survive it this time, but they are living now on, I mean, they're coming to the end of the road. People are getting tired of it.
Another scandal, if not for the Epstein, I think there probably should be more talk about, is the Italian investigators. They are investigating the claims of tourism paying to shoot civilians in Bosnia in the 1990s. Right? Yes. They're using some terms like human safari, sniper tourism. It's outrageous when I read it. And so, first of all, I guess it's true. I guess there's no reason to doubt it. But some people pointed out that I saw some people commenting on that. This is well known in some parts, I guess in Bosnia, around Sarajevo or something. People actually well aware of this, but nobody paid attention until now.
I,
So why is that?
I knew all about it. I mean,
Mhm.
I know about it. I've always known about this. I knew all about what was going on in Bosnia. I should say that it's not just Bosnia. I mean, I've heard stories. This I cannot confirm, but that in a certain area of North London, people from there have been going to Gaza and
Yeah.
joining the Israeli military, and they've been engaging in human safaris there.
Mhm.
And that at one time, something like that was also advertised for Ukraine, except, of course, you can't really play human safaris with the Russian army. So that basically ended very quickly. But no, absolutely. And that, by the way, it's important for people again in China to be aware of. I mean, we have this incredibly violent, brutal, sadistic side in our societies, in our culture, which the Chinese people experienced in the 19th century. And it's never completely gone away. Look at our look at our films. Look
Mhm.
at our film culture, for example, and you will see it there. So, absolutely, why is it coming? Why is it coming out now? That is a very good question, actually, which nobody really has provided a simple answer to. Um, it could be, it could be connected to domestic Italian politics.
Mhm.
I'm just guessing, but I mean, I don't really know.
Sometimes I think it, interestingly enough, I think it most times the truth eventually comes out, right? I think,
Yes.
but it's just for various reasons, sometimes purely coincidence, I think.
Yeah.
Somebody come upon something and then started to raising voice and then for whatever reason it pick up. So it's hard to say
Yeah.
exactly why many times. But one thing for sure is it does seems like to me, sooner or later the truths have the tendency to emerge, I feel.
Absolutely, absolutely. I
Mhm.
mean, I should say that my wife met a person in Germany who did exactly that and went not to Bosnia but to Croatia during the Yugoslav wars
Mhm.
to do exactly those sort of things.
Okay.
So, you know, this
Yeah.
is not unusual. A lot of this kind of thing goes on.
Okay, the Epstein file thing.
Yeah.
Okay, there's just so much. Okay, that need to
Mm.
sort through. First of all, I do say I am shocked at how quickly this bill passed. To
Yeah.
release the Epstein file past the Congress, I didn't expect that. I even had a program with my own, my Chinese audience, and I said it does seem like the House will pass it with more people than you think, and more Republicans. It seems willing to. But I'm not sure it will go fast in the Senate. Well, they did unanimous consent. So, and quickly pass it through. And even Trump kind of like shortly before the House cast a vote, he did a 180. So do you think regarding the Epstein file, the tide has changed?
Right. I think you were right to be cautious, and I think you're still right to be cautious. I think what galvanized everything, what changed the politics here, was the recent elections in the United States,
Mhm.
when the Republicans absolutely got hammered. And obviously, the economy, the situation in the economy played a big role. But everybody apparently who is familiar with the politics also knows that the Epstein scandal is doing real damage. I mean, not real damage, massive damage.
Mhm.
That there is a widespread belief, especially in working class America, that this is the elite in Washington covering up for an absolute grotesque scandal. I think there was something else, and that is that there's been these dribbles of emails that have been circulating,
Yeah.
which Epstein was involved in, and they have been exposing the extent to which Epstein was right up until the very end, right up until the moment of his final arrest, still involved with all the great people in Washington, in the world. In fact, he was talking to ministers in Norway. He was having meetings with the Russia's ambassador to the UN. He was having many contacts with Israel. He was talking to Larry Summers. He was exchanging emails with Larry Summers, and I think exposure of Larry Summers has also played a significant role, because Summers has been massively embarrassed and has been forced to announce his retirement. So I think what happened is that all of these people in Congress said to themselves, my God, if I vote against this, I'm going to be in very, very serious trouble. I will find that people are starting to wonder what I have been involved in. So for that reason, I'm going to vote for this bill. But you see, the point about this bill is that it requires disclosure of all information that is unclassified. I can tell you this for an absolute, I know this, I've spoken to people. The vast bulk of the information about Epstein, I'm not talking about, 70% or 80%. I'm talking about 99.9% is classified. So we're going to get a few interesting little bits and bobs, but the really interesting information is not going to be published. So your doubt and your skepticism is absolutely justified. We are nowhere close to the point of getting anything like the truth. And by the way, as for me personally, the questions just go on increasing. Who was this man who's able to speak to prime ministers and presidents and engage in global diplomacy in this sort of way? I mean, he wasn't even a billionaire, remember? I mean, he was a rich man, but he wasn't even a billionaire. So how come he had all of these contacts? Why was somebody like Larry Summers even giving him the time of day? I mean, these are the unanswered questions about Epstein, which I suspect will just go on being asked.
Before we talk more about Larry Summers, which is absolutely incredible, Trump himself seems out of sync with MAGA on this one. He fought pretty hard to not let this bill pass. Up until the moment, almost I think one day or less than one day before, the House will vote on it, and it's clear that they are going to pass it with probably a lot of Republican support. And that's when he turned. Why? I mean, at the same time, like Marjorie Taylor Greene has said repeatedly, she said, I talked to many Epstein victims. Trump is not involved. They have said Trump. So why is he fighting so hard? Like you said, it's a lot of the information that are classified anyway. So why is he fighting so hard and totally against the MAGA on this one? I don't understand that.
No, I don't understand it. And again, this is an unanswered question, but it's a very good one. It's an important one to ask. Now, I've been told that some of the donors, the members of the donor class, have come along to Trump and said that they don't want this to go out into the open, and he's always very nervous of getting on the wrong side of them. I've also been told that various people connected to Israel, and there's no doubt at all now that Epstein had connections with Israel. I mean, he was very closely involved with Ehud Barak, for example, former Israeli prime minister, that they don't want this to come out. So there is that. There is something else, though, and obviously all of the victims, they're saying Trump didn't do anything to them. Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's co-conspirator, if you like, she says the same. Apparently, Virginia Giuffre also said that she'd never had any problems with Trump. But if you go to Epstein's own emails, he seems to be insinuating to various people, especially to the Russians, that he does have some information about Trump. He's sort of implying all the time, you really want to know about Trump, speak to me. I know all about him. Now, there's no hint there of what that is. There's just a mention that, Trump was in the kitchen with Epstein's kitchen with all sorts of young women there and all that. But there's never any real clear clue. So, and of course, there's no evidence that Epstein himself ever used any information that he had about Trump to try to blackmail Trump himself.
Mhm.
But I do wonder actually whether there isn't something that happened involving Trump, which Epstein might have known, which makes Trump nervous. I don't think it was anything very big or very sinister in connection with the scheme, the overall scheme of things, but it might have been embarrassing to Trump in some way.
Yeah, I wonder that too. I wonder, the big part of it is the financial part of it, right?
Yeah,
Epstein has very strange, like very mysterious. The whole his finances just we got all kinds of questions, right? That never
yeah,
end. We
yeah,
might never get the answer. But anyway, so apart from the sex part, which people are very interested, but there is a big part of the money side. You always need to follow the money, right? So I
yeah,
wonder, Trump is a businessman, so he might have some business dealing with Epstein that can be questionable, and also the mere fact that he was with this guy, this Epstein guy. They seems very close for quite a few years. That
yeah,
itself probably is
yes,
embarrassing as well, I think. So
yes,
it could be that. Not only the email, but also on my trip back, I actually read Virginia Giuffre's book, No One's Girl. It's just a very good book. I think it's hard to read some parts of it, but overall, I think she writes well. I do think before her father, sexually abused her, she was a straight A student. She enjoyed reading and all that. So it's very unfortunate what happened to her. I actually think without all that, she could very well be a good student and even excel academically as well. Anyway, so overall, I think if I combine the emails and then the book and everything, I have to say one thing really stuns me or baffles me is people like Larry Summers. This is a guy who academically a high achiever. He
yeah.
got his tenure when he was 28 years old as one of the youngest one that in the Harvard School of Economics, he got tenure. Somebody like that, what can possibly he has in common with Jeffrey Epstein, a
Well,
registered sex offender? What can
yes.
the two of them have anything in common, right?
Well, you put exactly the right. You're asking exactly the right question. I mean, I don't understand it. I don't pretend I have the answer. I mean, um, people talk about the intelligence connections. There's lots of speculation that Epstein was some kind of Mossad agent. Perhaps he was, and I'm not, in any way disputing this. And I've seen nothing in the emails, by the way, which would argue against that.
Mhm.
But that is not, or so it seems to me, a sufficient explanation of how exactly Epstein was able to develop all of these enormous number of contacts with so many people around the world. There is no real explanation for this. And I mean, Larry Summers perhaps should be asked that very question.
Mhm.
So should some of the other people be. Peter Mandelson in Britain,
Uh,
Prince Andrew. Then we're not supposed to call him Prince Andrew anymore. But mind you, Prince Andrew is probably too dim, frankly, to give a good answer. But how exactly did all of these people fall into Epstein's net? And something else, given how enormous this net was, how did Epstein himself keep track of all of this? I mean, there's a lot of questions here, an awful lot of questions here. I think that I think there's something very sinister going on. You talked about the money. You're absolutely right to talk about the money. Um, Obviously, there's the sex, but
mhm.
there's also something else, and that is, as I said, this incredible network of people who seem to have been many of the most powerful people in the West. Notice not a hint so far of anything involving China, by the way. It's
Yeah.
very interesting, very, very interesting. So it's focused on the West,
Mhm.
and we see Epstein himself actually conducting diplomacy. I
Yeah.
mean, on behalf of whom and why?
And I had this discussion with my husband, right? Because
Yeah,
he's telling me there's even somewhere he read that there is a whole list of academias that got involved
Yeah.
with the or entangled with this
Yes.
Epstein affair. Lots of them high achievers. And I told him, I said, I thought people like Larry Summers, and there's others,
Mm.
Marvin Minsky, who is regarded as some kind of the father of AI. There's several fathers
Yes.
of AI, but he's one of those people um, who was mentioned in Virginia Giuffre's book. Okay. Noam Chomsky, another MIT professor. Okay.
Yeah.
Again, high achiever academic. So I thought people who are academia professors, I always thought that they more or less have a little bit of kind of a snobbish kind of attitude towards people
Yeah.
around them. So to the degree that I feel like professors, they would like to have a certain standard. Okay, if you want to
Yeah.
be my inner circle, my friend, you need to have certain standard, like a moral
Well,
standing or social standing or something. Again, it seems like it seems that the only explanation is because Epstein is rich. I guess so because he's rich, then and of course he's also very good at reading people and very
yeah.
manipulative and all that. So he could help them, in some way help those people. I guess that's the reason that these people just need people like Epstein to help them, like emotionally or something. I don't know. Is that what it
It,
is?
it's a very good question, and my wife is, of course, an
Yeah.
academic,
Hmm.
and there is some force in what you say. I mean, some academics are drawn to people who are very rich, but
Hmm.
academics, as you absolutely also correctly say, are incredibly arrogant people as a group.
Hmm.
I mean, they really are. I mean, they believe that they are geniuses,
Hmm.
almost without exception. Um, you would have thought that they would have no difficulty in seeing through the intellectual pretensions of Epstein, which were, I mean, his ideas were shallow and frankly ridiculous. So, what exactly it was that drew him like a moth to the drew them like a moth to the flame, it's difficult to understand. I mean, the people that we're talking about, tenured professors, they don't need vast sums of money. They're already rich. Their institutions mostly are already very, very rich.
Hmm.
So there must have been something else. And yes, Epstein was very charming, obviously, and very manipulative. But I've met Noam Chomsky, by the way. I found him extremely obnoxious and very difficult and very arrogant indeed. I didn't think he was an easy person to manipulate at all, actually. And he didn't seem to be like the kind of person who one could charm or impress very easily either.
Yeah.
So what is going on here?
Could it also be that despite of some people high achievers, they still feel very
Yeah.
insecure? Can
Yes.
that be
Yes.
that they need a constant validation, and Epstein is very good at giving them. If you read Larry Summers' emails between him and Epstein, for one thing, I think it's very distasteful for him to pursue a woman while he is still married and seeking advice from somebody like Epstein.
Oh,
But
you're
from
totally
the
right.
emails, it seems like Epstein is very good at praising him at the same time, making him feel good
Yeah.
about himself, right?
Well, I mean, a lot of people are very, very susceptible to flattery, and I would say
Mhm.
that academics often are. The one thing I would say is, again, talking about academics, is that mostly they seek praise from each other. I mean, that is where I mean they look for praise. And by the way, they're very cliquey, and you can get all
Mhm.
kinds of factions develop and all kinds of things of this kind. Again, it does seem a bit strange that they would want flattery and praise
Mhm.
from somebody like Epstein. I mean, some academics, many academics I know, despise wealth.
Yeah. Yes.
So what exactly again is this all about? I don't know. I get the sense that what really drew academics to Epstein was not charm or even money. It was a feeling that he had power.
Okay.
Bear in mind, in the West, again, what I always say about the West, that
Mhm.
we are very, very focused on power.
Yeah.
And the sense that Epstein could open doors and knew people and could pull levers and that kind of thing. And academics are very drawn to power. That, I think, is true of practically all of the ones that I've met.
So Epstein kind of like I mean, there's always a kind of like invisible club in a way, right?
Yeah,
So you want to be in that club. He is the driver in that club or somehow,
exactly,
right?
exactly,
So yeah,
exactly,
okay.
exactly. As
He
once described to me, Oxford was once described to me as one box inside another box inside another box. The secret was to get yourself into the actual box in the middle. And what I think some people felt was that Epstein was there, and anybody who was close to him was inside that box. That is my overwhelming sense about what this was all
yeah,
about. And perhaps that is true. Perhaps
yeah.
he did have that kind of contact and power as well.
Yeah, but it still bothers me that he is a sex offender, registered sex
Well,
offender,
absolutely. Well,
and they
absolutely.
would. I mean, the thing that bothers me or baffles me is that they don't seem to care that part at
Yeah,
all. They totally
they
ignore.
didn't care. They
Yeah.
didn't care about it. They ignored it. It was not as if apparently he changed his lifestyle in any way. So I mean, this there is a kind of inhumanity and callousness here, which is really quite extraordinary.
And also angers me is that the thing has been going on so long. The very first time the authority heard about Epstein was actually back in 1996.
Yeah,
There's this Annie Maria Farmer, the sisters. They are the
yeah,
one who reported to the police for being abused and by Epstein. If the police taking care of it seriously, take him seriously, take this whole thing seriously, the whole thing afterwards could have been avoided, but they
absolutely,
didn't, right?
absolutely.
And then she came out. I think Annie Farmer came out and even said that she said since 1996 they kept on bring this up into different administration. So it was Clinton. After that was W. Bush, and it was then later was Obama and Trump won. Biden and now Trump too. Just throughout all these times, they always finding ways to trying to bring the attention, the authority to this matter.
Yeah,
They always get nowhere. It seems like that's the so you can't even blame on particular administration or a particular
no,
FBI director or something like that. It's just the whole culture is there. It seems like the government just
absolutely. I mean, I mean, there seems to have been a general sense that whatever Epstein is doing, you leave him alone.
Mhm.
That he's somehow above the reach of ordinary law, which is a very frightening thing.
I have to say, after I read the book and then all this, I very much seriously have my face to capitalism has pretty much collapsed
Yeah,
because I feel the whole thing about capitalism, even in its more like a fair way. Right now, we don't even have a fair capitalism, like a fair competition. I
no,
don't think we even have
no,
that. But even let's say we do, fundamentally, capitalism will create wealth gap, right? There will be
yeah,
people who make way more money than others. And when they
yes,
have so much money, one of the things that motivates people to make money is once I have so much money, I will be treated differently. I will have a
yeah,
special set of rules for me, just for me because I'm so rich, right? I can get away with a lot of things. And
yes.
so, by almost by definition, the capitalist system will contradict the idea of everybody's equal. I feel
Well,
like
of course,
that's pretty
well, of
much
course,
it.
this is absolutely correct, and you're absolutely right. I mean, anybody who thinks that a Rockefeller and a Smith are on the same political level is being extremely naive.
Yeah.
This has always been true, by the way, but it has never been more true today. I mean, once upon a time, long ago, socialism was described to me as applied democracy, and you can sense what that means actually. So, the real practical, genuine apply democracy as it's applied is actually socialism.
Yeah.
And without it, democracy really, political democracy really has no real meaning.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah, I really think
Yeah.
if you see how these people think, I mean, first of all, it has gone on so long for Epstein. And then there are just plenty of people support him, they're totally comfortable around him. I mean, how can they explain that other than people bow down to money, right? People
Exactly.
just, yeah, attracted to. I think it's Tina
Right.
Brown or somebody who described this, said that the only thing people are embarrassed to be associated with somebody is somebody's poor. That's when people get embarrassed.
This is profoundly true. And again, if I can talk about Chinese culture, which is
Mhm.
probably one reason why, as a Chinese person, you're probably particularly shocked by this. This has not been true
Yeah.
of Chinese culture.
Hmm.
I mean, if you know all about the way China was worked, um, it was not the case that the very rich
Hmm.
had power in China. I mean, it was all about intellect, passing exams, serving the people, becoming a magistrate,
Hmm.
often in very hard, tough places. It was a completely different cultural set of cultural values. Again, wealth and power in the West are interconnected with each other, and wealth is a route to power and power over others. Power means the ability to control others.
Yeah, actually, in the Chinese history, there has been some layer, like some kind of a categorize people. It's called a 士
Yeah,
农工商. Shang is
yeah,
business, which is the bottom.
yeah,
The top is government officials. So
yeah,
the idea is you well
yeah,
respected the profession should be you should be a good official
yes,
serving the people. And then after that is farmers. People who are providing
yeah,
food for everybody. And then it's the handyman. So
yeah,
and then the business will be the bottom.
yes,
In fact, in
yes,
some parts of, I mean, in throughout the history, there was always this tension between the Huangdi and the rich people because the Huangdi are not settled with the fact that you have so much money, which means
yes,
inherently you will have power, and that is regarded as a threat to the real power, the royal
yes,
power. So,
yes.
so that's true. Yeah, it's
Absolutely. No, it is
yeah.
completely true. I mean, there's never been a time in Chinese history, never been a time in Chinese history, except possibly in the time of Chiang Kai-shek,
Hmm.
when wealth translated into political power.
Yeah.
I mean, it has never worked in that way. Whereas in the West, it's the usual way in
Hmm.
which power functions. I mean, the people who are powerful are rich, and the people who are rich are powerful.
Yeah.
Even the aristocracy, the military
Mhm.
aristocracy, was all about that.
Before I let you go, two things related
Mm.
in terms of the foreign policy. So Epstein consulted the Russian government a week before the Helsinki summit, consulting them how to deal with Trump. That's interesting, isn't it?
It's astonishing. And from what I can understand, this time at least, the Russians kept him at a distance, which begs many questions. I mean,
Mhm.
first of all, why did he think that the Russians would be interested in him?
Mhm.
I mean, that again tells you something. I mean, remember the Russian ambassador at the UN had a long meeting with him some time
Mhm.
before. But, so Epstein thinks that he can reach out to the Russians obviously know who he is,
Mhm.
but for some reason they decided this time they're not going to have any dealings with him. So again, there's a lot going on here.
Yeah.
Now, this is diplomacy. This is Epstein inserting himself into diplomacy between the president of Russia and the president of the United States.
Mhm.
There's actually a law in the United States, by the way, against this kind of thing about private individuals engaging in diplomacy in this kind of manner. But obviously, that doesn't apply to Epstein. Again, I find myself asking the same question as you. What is this all about? What is this all about?
Mhm.
And what is it that Epstein thinks he's going to be able to tell the Russians, which the
Mhm.
Russians don't already know?
Mhm.
And why does he think the Russians will be interested in listening to him? And why, given that they've spoken to him previously, did the Russians decide they don't want to actually speak to him? Is it because they know something about Epstein which we don't? Maybe someone should ask them. Nobody has, by the way.
Yeah. Another thing is that Epstein obviously hate Imran Khan, which is a little bit surprising to me. He said
Yes.
Imran Khan in Pakistan is much greater threat to the peace than Erdogan, Khomeini, Xi Jinping, and Putin. So
Yeah.
why is he so much against Imran Khan? Isn't
Well,
that interesting?
this is another excellent question. Now, all I can say about that is that the United States was very, very hostile to Imran Khan and engineered his overthrow as prime
Hmm.
minister, which
Hmm.
has, of course, led to him being imprisoned. So this is one instance when Epstein is in total harmony, if you like, with
Hmm.
American foreign policy. And I wonder whether a lot of the questions, the answer to a lot of the questions about Epstein aren't to be found in Langley and in the archives of the US National Security Council.
Now, some people in China just speculated because Pakistan is the Muslim country that has nuclear weapon.
Yes.
So if Imran Khan is not in the, you cannot easily control him,
Yeah.
that would be something that people like Epstein will see as a threat to Israel, right? So that's
Well, exactly.
probably, yeah, okay.
Yes, but the thing about Imran Khan is that he's secular.
Hmm.
He's not somebody who is what I mean made his career around hostility to
Hmm.
Israel. He was friendly with China. He
Every
was also
Pakistan,
Pakistan is friendly to China,
yeah.
but he was also somebody who seemed to be interested in having a better relationship with Russia.
So maybe they just don't like the fact that Pakistan already a nuclear power and have good relationship with both Russia and China, that will make Pakistan too powerful or something,
Too
probably.
powerful and too
Mhm.
independent, and
Independent.
not as willing to follow American foreign policy as it has sometimes been in the past.
Okay. Anyway, just this whole Epstein affair, after I read the book,
Yes,
all those emails, I feel like
yes,
I pretty much lost my previous respect to Harvard and MIT. I almost feel like those are dirty place. I don't know. It just
absolutely.
seems, and I see the whole Ivy League in a very different way now. So,
You're quite right too. I mean, again, this is something which one day you can talk about with my wife, who, as I said, is
mhm,
an academic, and she will confirm all your worst concerns. Just very quickly before we finish about
mhm,
wealth and power and the interconnection between the two. Of course, the Roman Empire, is in some way always the starting point for any understanding of the West. Well, a fact which many people don't know is that the Roman Senate had a financial qualification. You had to be worth a certain fixed amount of money
mhm,
in order to be eligible for membership, a very, very large amount of money.
mhm.
So you had to be a very, very rich man by law in order to be a member of the Senate.
And the U.S. Constitution, when they started, all men are created equal. Here, the man defined as white male property owner, right?
Yeah.
So it, even that, you have to have certain wealth in order
Yes,
to be
absolutely.
qualified as a man, so a
No,
human.
absolutely,
So,
absolutely. In the West, let's be quite
mhm,
straightforward about this. In the West, the people who have power overwhelmingly are people who are white,
mhm,
English speaking, mostly male, and rich.
yeah.
That's what it's all about.
Okay. Let's talk next time again. So there's always a lot to
Absolutely,
talk. So anyway,
absolutely.
have a great weekend. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sophia. Have a very great weekend too. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.